It was the summer of 2019 when I first heard about the road that supposedly only appears after midnight. I was visiting my cousin Leo, who lived in a small town that most people pass right by. One of those places where the streets feel quieter, the shops close early, and the few people still lingering past sundown seem almost out of place. But Leo loved it there. He loved the peace, the escape, the way the stars seemed brighter over the open fields surrounding his house. One night, while we were having a few beers on his porch, Leo told me about the road. He mentioned it offhand, like it was just another town legend. But the way he said it caught my attention. "There's this road that only shows up after midnight," he said, tilting his beer bottle in thought. "It's out past the old Ridley Mill. Locals say it only appears when the clock strikes 12. No sign of it before or after." I raised an eyebrow, feeling a skeptical smile tug at the corner of my mouth. "And where exactly does this magic road go?" Leo shrugged, glancing at the dark fields stretching around us. "No one knows, but they say that once you find it, once you're on it, getting off isn't so simple." He laughed, but there was a hint of something in his voice. A flicker of hesitation, like he was testing if I'd believe him. He probably thought I'd laugh it off as some small town ghost story. Instead, I felt a strange curiosity settle in. "How far is it from here?" I asked. "Maybe a 10-minute drive, 15 tops," he replied, giving me a sidelong look. "You thinking of looking for it?" "Why not?" I said, draining the rest of my beer. "I mean, come on, aren't you even a little bit curious?" Leo looked at me, his face unreadable in the dim porch light. "I went once," he said after a pause. "We didn't stay long. Just didn't feel right." There it was, that twinge of unease again. But I ignored it. I didn't believe in ghost stories, but I did believe in weird experiences. And this town seemed like the perfect place for one. I convinced Leo to take me there that night, as soon as the clock struck 12. He agreed, but with obvious reluctance. When the time came, we climbed into his old truck, the headlights cutting through the mist that had started to settle over the fields. It was quiet as we drove, the kind of quiet where you could hear the engine humming and every pebble crunching under the tyres. The sky was dark, with clouds swallowing most of the stars. It felt like we were the only two people awake for miles. Leo guided the truck through narrow back roads until we reached the old Ridley Mill, a decaying structure looming in the middle of an overgrown field. He slowed down, glancing at the dashboard clock. It was 11:56. "All right, we just wait a few minutes," he said, his voice tense. I peered out the window, squinting into the dark. The road in front of us stretched on, a dead end marked by a wooden gate leading to the mill. Nothing unusual, just an ordinary, empty road. And then, the clock hit 12. I blinked, feeling my breath hitch. Straight ahead, right where the dead end had been, another road appeared. A narrow, winding stretch that disappeared into the woods beyond the mill. I couldn't believe my eyes. It looked like it had always been there, seamlessly blending into the dirt road we'd driven up. But I knew I hadn't seen it a moment before. The headlights flickered, illuminating the start of this newly emerged path. "See?" Leo muttered, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "This is it." I stared, feeling a shiver crawl down my spine. The road looked wrong somehow, like it didn't quite belong. The trees lining it were contorted and close together, forming a tunnel that seemed to swallow the light. But the strangest part was the silence. The usual night sounds, crickets, wind rustling the trees, were completely absent, as if the road had muted everything around it. "Well," I said, masking my unease with a forced grin. "We didn't come all this way to just look at it, did we?" Leo hesitated. "We can still turn back," he said quietly. "Come on," I scoffed. "What's the worst that could happen?" Reluctantly, Leo put the truck in drive and pulled onto the road. The wheels crunched over the dirt and gravel, the headlights barely piercing the thickening darkness. My stomach tightened, a nagging sense of dread prickling at the back of my mind. But I shrugged it off. It was just the road, right? As we drove deeper, I noticed the road wasn't as smooth as it seemed at first. The surface was riddled with small, sharp stones, making the truck jolt and rattle with each bump. A faint mist began to seep from the trees, swirling across the road like ghostly fingers reaching for us. It wasn't long before I lost track of time. The clock on the dashboard seemed to have frozen, the glowing numbers stuck at 12:13. I pointed it out to Leo, but he just shook his head, his knuckles white as he gripped the wheel. "This place, it does something to time," he muttered. "It's not right." I chuckled, trying to sound unfazed. "Yeah, sure. Maybe the battery's just acting up." But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. It started to feel as though we were breathing in treacle. The air became intangibly thick and electric. It felt like the truck was moving through a tunnel, the trees on either side forming an unbroken wall of black. And then we saw the lights. At first, they were faint, flickering in the distance like a mirage. But as we drew closer, they sharpened into focus. 2 bright beams coming towards us. Headlights. "Finally, another car," I muttered, feeling a surge of relief. But as the lights approached, I realized something was off. The vehicle coming towards us didn't slow down. In fact, it seemed to speed up, hurtling straight for us down the narrow road. "Leo, move!" I shouted, but there was nowhere to go. The trees on either side were too close, leaving no room to swerve. Leo slammed on the brakes, and we sat frozen, waiting for the inevitable impact. But to our surprise, the car passed straight through us. I felt a strange sensation, like a shiver that cut straight through my bones, as if the car had driven through us like a ghost. I glanced at Leo, who looked just as pale and shaken. "What the hell was that?" I gasped. He didn't answer, just pressed harder on the gas. The truck lurched forward, speeding down a dark road as we both tried to process what had just happened. Neither of us said a word. We couldn't believe what we'd just seen. Was it a trick of the light? Surely not. And then, out of nowhere, I felt something brush against my arm. I whipped around, looking into the back seat, but there was nothing there. Just empty seats and shadows. I shook my head, telling myself it was just my imagination. But a few minutes later, I felt it again. A faint, cold touch, like fingers grazing my skin. I looked at Leo, but he was focused on the road, his jaw clenched tight. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to seem paranoid. The road seemed to stretch on forever, winding deeper and deeper into the woods. I lost all sense of direction, of time. It felt like we'd been driving for hours, even though the clock on the dashboard hadn't changed. Just when I thought the road would never end, we saw a faint light up ahead. It looked like a building, its windows glowing in the dark. Leo slowed down, and as we got closer, I realised it was a small gas station. It looked old, abandoned even, with cracked windows and peeling paint. But the lights were on. Leo pulled up to the pump, and we both got out, grateful for the chance to stretch our legs. The air outside had a strange energy, smelling faintly of wet leaves and something metallic. The mist had cleared a bit, revealing the dark forest surrounding the station. "Maybe we can ask for directions," I suggested, though I didn't see any sign of an attendant. Leo nodded, but he looked uneasy. We walked up to the door, which creaked open under my hand. Inside, the station was dimly lit, with shelves stocked with dusty cans and faded snack wrappers. The air was stale, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. I could sense a vague smell of mould and decay. "Hello?" I called out, but my voice just echoed back at me. Leo wandered over to the counter, running his fingers over the cracked surface. "This place. Something feels off," he muttered. Before I could respond, something on the wall caught my eye. It was a bulletin board, covered with yellowed newspaper clippings. Most of them were faded, but one headline stood out, the letters stark and bold. "Missing. Locals report disappearances." I felt my jaw begin to clench in trepidation as I read the article. It talked about people who'd disappeared in the area over the past few months. Their vehicles found abandoned weeks later, empty and undisturbed. But there was one detail that sent a wave of nausea through me. The article mentioned a car exactly like Leo's truck. Same model, same colour, everything. "Leo," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Look at this." He came over, his eyes widening as he read the article. That's impossible. It's just a coincidence." But as we stared at the board, I noticed something else. There were photos pinned around the article. Grainy, black and white photos of people standing outside the gas station, looking just as bewildered as we were. And in one of the photos, barely visible in the background, was Leo's truck. There was no way it was another truck. It had the same unique scratches and dents as his vehicle. We stared at each other, the weight of realization settling in. This wasn't just a road that appeared after midnight. It was a trap, a place where people were lured in and lost, their lives erased and rewritten in some perverse, endless cycle. "We have to go," I said, grabbing his arm. "Now." We sprinted back to the truck, the gas station lights flickering as if trying to hold us back. Leo started the engine and we tore down the road, the trees blurring past us. I didn't look back, didn't want to see if the station was still there. After what felt like an eternity, we saw the familiar outline of the mill, the dead-end gate coming into view. As soon as we crossed back onto the main road, the silence lifted, the normal sounds of the night flooding back in. I glanced at the clock. It was 12:14. We didn't speak on the way back. We didn't need to. We both knew that we'd narrowly escaped something that we couldn't begin to understand. That road. It was still out there, waiting for the next car, the next driver willing to venture into the unknown. But even now, I sometimes wonder. I wonder if we ever really escaped, or if we're still on that road, driving in circles, waiting for someone to finally find us. And every time the clock strikes 12, I feel a strange pull, a whisper, urging me back to that dead-end road. And sometimes, just sometimes, I consider following it.